All right, it's awards time. Russillo has a ballot. I have a ballot. I talked to Zach Lowe over the weekend. He gave up his ballot this year. Already has regrets. He's ready to get back in. He's ready to have a taste. We'll do MVP ballot first. I think these are our official ballots. We're just going to announce them here. We have to send them into the league in a couple of days.
Can I allow myself just a little wiggle room? Far more in pen than last week, but since we know we're not getting the. This is probably what it's going to be. Right. It's probably what it's going to be, but I need to look it over a second time. Is my point.
Okay,
so I worked on it last night. Yeah, I worked on it all last night. I worked on it again this morning. I even emailed the NBA. I was like, hey, I don't have the ballot. And they're like, I'm actually not going to be getting it until later on. I was like, all right, I just want to make sure I didn't get it. And then once I had that, I was like, I'm ready to do this, but we know how it works. Okay. There's a chance I could possibly change something, but this is pretty close to what I'm going to do. All right. That's my
So you're using a really nice pencil, but not a Sharpie.
Yeah, it's a pen if I'm going to get technical about it, but I have other pages. Yeah.
As you know, I'll do my annual preamble. I love the awards. I think they're really important. It's an important snapshot of the season. It's fun to look back on. It's fun to, when you're comparing these guys historically someday and you talk about all NBA teams and where they placed on the MVP ballot, stuff like that, it matters. We take it very seriously. The MVP ballot, I have Jokic first. SGA climbed to second for me because they got the 1 seed. I had him third heading into the weekend behind Luka. And then Oklahoma City getting the 1 seed with the year that SGA had. I'm second. I have Luka third. I did it, man. I put Jalen Brunson fourth and I put Giannis fifth. So Jokic, SGA, Luka, Brunson, Giannis is going to be my ballot. What did you have?
I had Jokic. Number 2, I have Luka. Number 3, I have Giannis. I think his individual season to do what he did is something that needs to be ahead of some of the other guys. I struggled a lot with the last 2 spots, but I went SGA, and there's plenty of statistical numbers that would tell you 4 might even be low for him. And then based on the way I did my first team All-NBA and then the MVP thing and how I did it, I ended up putting Brunson down 5th, and then I'll explain what I did on all first team NBA later on.
Yeah,
so we have the same 5. Yeah, different order.
So I'm going to have Brunson second team All-NBA and 4th MVP because I think they're 2 slightly different honors.
We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but that's exactly what I did too. Because I was like, I'm not removing Tatum from first team All-NBA, and I'm going to acknowledge what it is that Brunson has done in the valuable sense of it. So that's funny. We didn't talk about this at all, and we ended up doing basically the same thing, even though you have him 4th.
I thought about having him 3rd because to get to 50 wins, as we discussed in part 1, with Randall missing 60% of the season and Mitchell Robinson out and a couple new teammates, and I just thought it was really impressive what he means to the franchise and the team, how because he's there, that DiVincenzo ends up coming there. I think stuff like that matters when you have like a real guy. When you think like people are arguing about, oh my God, did they overpay for Brunson? And I remember you and I telling people like, that deal's fucking awesome, man. You're not going to regret Brunson.
I never thought he'd be this.
I promise you. No, neither of us did, but we knew that was a good deal. You know, you're getting a guy who proved that he could play in a playoff series and be impactful. We never knew he was going to be a 29 point a game guy. I had him ahead of Giannis just because, I mean, first of all, they finished with a higher seed than the Bucks. I think that the winning piece of it matters a little bit, but the whole Bucks season was so strange with the 2 coaches, and it was so choppy with Giannis and Dame sometimes offensively, and they spent a lot of money on that roster. Whether it was the right roster and it's the right group of guys, like, they went all in. They traded all their picks for Holiday and then for Dame. They spent a lot of money on the side pieces on the roster, and I just felt like he was in a good situation and the team underachieved. So I couldn't put him higher than 5.
Right. Well, the reason they finished in the 3 seed behind New York is because he wasn't playing. He was the first player to ever score 30 a game and finish at 60% or better from the floor. First guy to ever do it. And when I add in the defensive stuff that I think he does, where, you know, over the years, we've looked at this Milwaukee defense and I go, you know, the real thing is just Giannis being able to screw everything up.
And yet he never gets all
right.
defense mentions ever.
Right. So he played 73 games this year. And I do probably look at, like, all of us look at it differently that have our votes. You don't want somebody like being a complete wild card with it, but the seeding can matter for me, and then it can kind of not matter. And I think that's where I'd get some pushback on having SGA fourth. It's like, hey, well, they were the 1 seed, and you go, well, you know, Boston, if there was a Boston MVP candidate that was tied with somebody else, I would go, okay, well, look, they finished that many games ahead of everybody else. I'm going to recognize that and put that in there. I just feel like Giannis is at worst the 3rd best player in the league, and he just had one of the great historical seasons. He plays a ton of defense. He plays hard every single night. He played basically a full season, and it came down to the last day in a game where he wasn't playing for the last few. So even though they were sort of a mess, they still only finished 1 game behind Milwaukee, so it wasn't like I was going to put Brunson ahead of him. I mean, look, I had Giannis 2 most of the year until Luka just put together this stretch, and Dallas, you know, collectively was far better than what we saw from Milwaukee.
We should say being 5 this season, there's no shame in that compared to some of the other seasons we've had in the past. 10 years ago, there were guys getting the 4 spot and the 5 spot in MVP where you're like, maybe I'll put this guy here. In this case, like Tatum not being on it when the Celtics go 64-18, like that tells you how deep and how awesome I think a lot of the players were this year.
I did the same thing though. With, like, Tatum was always 4th or 5th, probably more 5th, which is not really a knock on him. It's more about the team. Like it's hard for Tatum because you can't be like, oh, well, he's that great. Yet we sit here and look at the starting 5 and go, this is statistically been one of the best starting 5s in the history of the league. So I look at it as a recognition of Brunson and like an incredible accomplishment where, you know, Knicks fans are going to go, well, you know, he should have been. There's just no world I was ever going to vote him ahead of a couple of these other guys. And just as great as this run has been, I don't think he's those, you know, of the 500 guys that play. Okay, I have him higher than 495 of them.
Right.
But I'm not going to put him ahead of guys like Luka or Jokic.
It's a good argument. I don't know if there's a right answer. I feel good about Brunson at 4. Shea at 2, I'll just make the case really quick. So the 1 seed to me does matter with that because we watched so many games this year where I couldn't believe they won the game, and they basically won the game because of the shit he did down the stretch, where I felt like if you put other players in that spot on that OKC team, his 2-way play, the burden that he had offensively, the way he was always getting to his spots no matter who they're playing against, and the consistency of just like, we talked about this last month with him about just how many good games that dude has. You know, I think, what was the stat? Like he had like 52 30-point games, something like that. The consistency, his ability to get to the line over and over again. They're plus 10.8 net when he plays. He played 37 minutes, 2,537 minutes. Him with Jalen Williams together, they're over 12 net rating. He led the league in steals, 2.1. And I just thought he had like a kind of unnatural burden because Milwaukee, like they would have nights where it's like, all right, it's a Dame night. You know, all right, Giannis just all he has to do is run around and, you know, get some rebounds and get some lobs. And this could be the night Dame has 45. There was never a night like that for SGA. SGA is like, we don't really have a center. I'm relying on dudes who are 22, 23, 24 years old. We're going to other people's houses and winning. I was just so impressed. I thought about him a tiny bit for actual MVP. And
no kidding.
And then I took a glass of water. I'm like, what am I doing? Jokic is the best player in 10 years. But no, I was just like, all right, this guy got the 1 seed. Denver got the 2 seed. Let me think this out in my head. And then I was like, all right, Jokic is obviously the MVP. But he made me pause for 2 seconds, which was inconceivable a month ago.
I always find that interesting that you would feel a certain way about MVP and then the seeding can change in the last 12 hours.
Well, but part of it to me is like, who had a harder job, right? And Jokic, the reason, this is where I landed with Jokic, like the reason he didn't get the MVP was because Murray didn't play enough games. think Murray ended up with 58. They had to rest Murray down the stretch for he sat out like 8 games. And I just don't think when Murray doesn't play, I just don't think that team's that special around Jokic, But it was at least a conversation. But Jokic is the MVP. He's the best player in the league.
For the metric stuff, which was always funny about the Jokic Embiid arguments, because Embiid people will be like, oh, you guys are just using these stupid numbers. And you'd be like, oh, you mean the ones where Embiid's like off the charts and all of them?
Yeah.
Like some of these numbers tell you, like, oh, hey, if Jokic has the most win shares in the league this year, like, okay, that's pretty good. But then the win share stuff, PER was probably more susceptible to falling victim of like really overvaluing big guys that rebounded a lot, maybe didn't shoot that much, so they had a higher field goal percentage because they were really stretching it out. The fact that SGA, like this is an argument for your side of the SGA thing of having him too, like he's only behind Jokic in some of that stuff. And
it's
for
crazy.
A perimeter guy, a lot of it's I don't need to mention the free throw part of it. He's just that good at adding the free throw part to the rest of the game. So
my favorite SGA stat is, by the way?
Do you think he'll finish second in the overall voting?
I don't know. I think it's going to be between him and Luka for second, and I honestly don't know. I think it's going to be close.
Do you think he's better than Luka?
No.
Okay.
I'm
not doing this because I think you're wrong. I'm asking.
I think he had a better regular season than Luka did because his job was harder, and there needed to be a consistency.
Wait, you think Dallas? You think? Geez, I don't know about that. OKC's a better roster than Dallas.
But Luka had the Kyrie piece, though.
Yeah, but what about our guy Jay Williams, 2 or 1, not 2?
I love Jalen Williams and thought about him as like a fringe. Can I talk myself into him 13 All NBA? But at the end of these OKC games, it was kind of SJ or bust. There was a couple of times where Jalen Williams was doing the Kawhi thing that we talked about, last week or 2 weeks ago, where he'd start going by people. But for the most part, you knew where OKC was going every time. I don't know. I was impressed. The best SGA stat for me, on 2-point field goals, he shot 58%, which for a guard is nuts. That's just not, but it speaks to like when you watch him and just how he'd get to his spots and he'd get his points or he'd get fouled. I thought Luka was awesome. Luka was 34, 9, and 10. He made 284 threes. His usage was lower, 36. He played the most minutes he's ever played, 26, 24. So, and Dallas got better as the year went along, which I think matters more than anything. But, OKC had a better season. So, you mentioned Jokic. He led the league in PR, win share 48, and VORP. He played the most minutes he's ever played this year, over 2,700.
He crushed it in VORP, by the way.
Huge VORP this year for that guy. Plus 11.6 net. 27, 12, and 9 every night, not to mention some of the greatest like team chemistry stuff. And, Murray was, I wouldn't say like Lou Gehrig this season.
There's another thing I was looking at with Jokic's numbers before the All-Star break, 33.8 minutes per game. Then they cranked it up to about 37. He took one more shot. That's always been the thing with him at certain times. Like one of the years we won the scoring, when he won the MVP, you were like, do you know how low he is in shot attempts in comparison to these other guys? And this guy's won MVP. This is all the hours of watching it. And I couldn't imagine coming up with a different conclusion than Jokic. Just the number of times where he controlled everything. And as I say that, it's like, oh, wait, Doncic doesn't do that as well, and you're just like, okay, you're right. But there's just this puppet master element of Jokic that's happening every second he's out on the floor. And I couldn't, I just didn't struggle with it as much this year because it wasn't the Embiid showdown. Now, if Embiid had finished the year with the highest ever PER, like imagine the wrench
and scoring
that throws
35
and all
a game and 70 games. And I'm with you. The other part with Jokic, which we talk about every year, is something about how he plays transfers to some of the other guys in the team, and they're a little more unselfish and a little more thoughtful about passes and extra looks than I think they would be if they were on like Charlotte. So I just wanted to mention that.
You think it'd be different on Charlotte?
Yeah, I think it'll be a little different.
You don't like Michael Porter Jr. on Charlotte?
Not as much. I don't know if Reggie Jackson is as impactful off the bench. Just out of curiosity, because Shea versus Luka, I think it was closer than it seems like you think. I also don't think Shea is the player he's ultimately going to be. Like, I don't think this was his career apex. He's never going to be better than this. If he starts shooting threes, like let's say he becomes a 40% three-point shooter and starts making like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 threes a game on top of everything else he's doing. I do think there's a world where he swims in that pool with Luka and those guys, and he might already be there. He's going to have to do it in the playoffs, which we haven't seen yet, and that's the last piece of this, and that's why we're always careful with regular season versus playoffs. I want to see him do this in a playoff series with a team that's playing against him for 2 straight weeks, that's planning for him, thinking about ways to fuck with him. We've never seen it. But I do think if he adds a 3-point shot, his stats might not be that far away from Luka's.
But whenever there's a scoring peak for a player, it usually comes down to like, all right, well, what else is around him? So I would agree that if SGA cranks it up to 37, 38% from 3 and starts taking 5 or 6 of those a game, as opposed to, I think, just over 3 now.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you could just keep adding it. But what I would see on the horizon for the Thunder is that he may score less because the team continues to get
Chet
better.
and Jalen Williams get better. Yeah, you might be right.
All the assets of what that ends up turning into, because there's probably one other big piece coming.
So your toughest MVP ballot omission was who?
Probably Tatum, because I felt like, hey, I know I'm going to have Tatum in the 5.
Yeah.
Like I can't believe it, but that's where I split the difference on the all first team NBA. Like, that's so funny we did the same thing, because I thought like, hey, that's kind of a way I feel like I'm acknowledging both.
Yeah. Tatum for me too.